Thank you for joining me for another episode of Awaken Empowered TV. I'm your host, Ethan Fox. Today I'm joined by Patricia Corey, and we speak about a lot of very interesting topics, including the Earth's ascension to a fourth dimensional reality. And we discuss ancient Atlantis and many of the books that she's written about that, as well as her books that were channeled from Syrian Collective and what they have to say about this time that we're living in and where we're going as a global consciousness and civilization. But before we bring on Patricia, I want to mention our Awaken Empowered Expo coming up this September 7th, 8th, and 9th at the Doubletree Hilton in downtown Detroit, Michigan in the United States. And we'll have 3 whole days of lots of incredible presenters and activities for you to attend and to experience. But really, it's more of a transformative vibrational event. So most of the time, we don't hear from people about all the cool things they learned, but more about how it's really changed their lives in a very profound way. So it's something you definitely want to attend, and you can buy tickets at awakenempoweredexpo.com. And also, I want to mention our Seed of Life School for Kids, which is having its very first weekend retreat this summer, the first weekend in August. So save that in your schedule for your kids this summer. And we'll be posting the registration information for that very soon on our Facebook page and all of our pages as well. So check back on that in the near future. You'll have more information probably within the next few weeks on how to register for that. So without any further delay, I'd like to bring on Patricia Corey. Hi, Patricia. Welcome to Awaken Empowered TV. It's really a pleasure for me to have you on the show today and to spend a couple of hours with you and asking you lots of interesting questions. Where are you joining me from today?
I now live in the Azores Islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which I think is Atlantis, and so do the locals. I just moved here 2 years ago after spending 30 years in Italy.
And are there any artifacts there of Atlantis, or is it just their stories from the indigenous people there who believe that?
Well, that's a very good question. Actually, recently, aside from the fact that maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they discovered a fisherman was in the waters of a different island, because there are 9 islands in the archipelago of Azores, and he found a pyramid underwater, and then they seems like it got hushed up, but he gave the exact coordinates. He saw a perfect pyramid, big pyramid under the water. But on the island that faces mine, it's called Pico, and my island is called Fayal. And on this island of Pico, there are ruins of pyramids. I mean, they're very ruined because over the centuries, the farmers have taken the stones and made other things with them, which happens all the time with artifacts. But you can still see step pyramids over there. So that's exciting.
And is there a general belief with the population there that that island was once part of Atlantis?
Yes, if you come here, you see Atlantis Pizza, Atlantis Taxi, Atlantis Laundry. I mean, they really get it. And one day I asked some local people, so what's with all this Atlantis stuff? I mean, do you understand that this is Atlantis? And she said, oh, yes. We call it the land of the ancients, but we don't publicize it. I said, you don't? What about the Atlantis Pizza, Laundry, and Taxi? And she laughed. But there is a knowledge or a knowing of the people. This is a gentle people. They're land and ocean people. And they have centuries of real roots here, real history, real ancestry. And they know. They know a lot about the land.
And I've written at least one book on Atlantis, right?
Yes, I wrote called Atlantis Rising, The Struggle of Darkness and Light. And it's interesting because even the way I got here, if you'd like me to tell you the story, is very exciting. I was writing a book called Before We Leave You, Messages from the Great Whales and the Dolphin Beings. And I was called, I just figured, well, if I'm going to propose that I'm channeling whales and dolphins, then to be anything resembling ethical, I've got to jump off a boat and get in the wild with these dolphins. And I've always been terrified of sharks because I'm an old Californian. So I faced my fear, which was also necessary. and jumped off a boat in the middle of the ocean here. And I mean, this is Atlantic Ocean. It's not like the coast of Hawaii where the dolphins are kind of used to going in and out during the day into the bay. And I swam with 250 wild bottlenose dolphins in the ocean out there in the middle of the ocean. And I decided, I need to live here. That's how I ended up here. The dolphins called me.
Now, what's the population there? Is it very large, or?
On this particular island, supposedly it's 15,000 people, but it's interesting, that statistic, because I think that's also has to do with the fact that that may not be residents living here year round, because a lot of Portuguese, a lot of Azorians migrated because there's not a lot of work here. I mean, it's picking up a little bit because of tourism and whatever, but a lot of them left and went to California particularly. So when they're all here for the summer, I would think maybe 15,000, but there's a lot of empty houses here. It's wonderful. It's underpopulated. I love being in an environment that's underpopulated.
So tell me about, let's back up to your childhood. I know you've had some very interesting experiences all throughout your life. Tell me more about that. What was that like for you, and anything unusual? I know you had an imaginary friend, and that was a very interesting story. So if you can share some of that, that would be great.
Well, I first of all have to say that my mother's no longer with us, but she was an extraordinary woman, and she was my guiding light. And I was blessed with this very open mother. She was a rebel of her time. And so as a young child, I was already communicating with all kinds of beings. And of course, lots of children are and have. It's just that until now, children have been talked out of it. It's like, no, you don't see an imaginary little fairy. Now be quiet and eat your potatoes. Nowadays, with so much spirituality and new age concepts and just openness, children are encouraged more to talk about these things they see. But at the time when I was a kid, you didn't talk about it. But I saw and heard messages all the time when I was a kid. And my mom says, and I've told this story before, so I hope nobody's bored hearing it again, but my mother said that when I was 4, I came in from the garden. We lived in the mountains, so we had a lot of land, and I spent a lot of time outside in the tall grass, and these beings used to come and talk to me. So my mom said that one day I walked into the kitchen, 4 years old, and said, did you know that I'm not from this universe. I'm from another universe, far away, and another galaxy. And my mother said, she was cooking. She said, where are you from? And I told her, you're not ready to know this yet. It's too much, but there will be a time when we can talk about it. Walked back outside. So I can say that now that there's this starseed consciousness, a lot of people feeling that they don't really belong here, or that they're from another star system. There's such a galactic consciousness evolving now. A very exciting thing, considering we're merging on so many levels with new, possibly even immigrating off this planet. But at 4, I was already in contact with beings from other dimensions, and I already was talking the language that children talk today.
And so how do you suggest that parents who have, because a lot of the parents that I know have children like that, who are having those kinds of experiences, and to a great extent, some of them don't really know how to nurture that or to respond to those kinds of experiences. Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, you don't want to exalt this in a child and have them start fantasizing about things because of the input they get from so many media. And on the other, you want to allow them space to explore this. So to parents, I say, be as grounded as possible, and give your child the space without feeding this galactic rhetoric that we're all using, so that as much as possible the experience is pure. I use this a lot when I teach people. It's like, let's not exacerbate the experience in let's say a deep guided meditation. If you think you saw a light, let it just be a light. It doesn't have to be a spiraling purple light or a multidimensional spectral experience. Let it be just a light so that you have the integrity of the experience. And when you go back to it and you recall it, there is that aspect in it, that what we started out saying earlier when we first connected, that grounded quality where you can find your anchor. And for children, I think that's very important.
Now, your life went on from there, and what did you end up doing with your life or career until all of the other very interesting things happened that redirected your life?
Well, I got a great college education in California, and I was in the hotel industry. I was a hotel executive. Something called me to Italy because I am Italian. And I just looked at my life and said, all right, the rate I'm going now, I was sales and marketing director for 6 hotels. And I was 33, and I thought, I'm so locked in. I'm locked into the American system. I'm, commuting. I'm working 12, 14 hours a day. It's the grind. I'm going to move to Italy. And I got a one-way ticket. I actually told a friend of mine, my soulmate was waiting for me in Italy. And she said, did you meet someone? I said, not yet, but I know he's there. And I got a one-way ticket and I moved to Italy. I figured I can afford to be there for a year. And, this is a time to be a little crazy, which I recommend to people. Just get out of your box and take a dare, if you will, and live your life. So that's what I did. And I did meet the soulmate. We were together for 30 years. And in that time, I did marketing. I started my own public relations and marketing business. But in 1995, I opened the first New Age healing center in Rome. It was called Lightworks. And I was doing psychic healing, crystal healing, psychic clairvoyant readings, which I still do to this day. And it introduced a lot of things. I had, other healers working there, and that became clearly my destiny. And I've been doing this work ever since.
So I find that a lot of people these days are finding themselves in mainstream society and suddenly having awakening experiences and feeling a bit out of place and stuck in a box, as you said. So would you suggest that if somebody follows their dreams or what's in their heart, that the universe tends to support that and everything works out in the end?
Yeah, I think that first of all, you've got to have a dream. And so a lot of people are stuck without they're not believing that they have something to dream, to create, because they're so locked into survival mind. And of course, that's being inculcated in the human brain, particularly in the States. I'm not there, but I see what's happening. People working 2 jobs, or two people working 2 jobs to make ends meet. That's not the way we're supposed to live. So, without a dream, life becomes quite a grind. And I've always been a dreamer, and I've always been a person who dares. And sometimes I always land on my feet, but you've got to be prepared for some setbacks. And moving to Europe was not easy. People say, wow, that's so romantic. You just picked up and moved to Europe. I was like, yeah. Migrating to Italy was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. But I achieved it. And I had many good years there. Always traveling, I'm passionate about culture and mysticism. And so my answer to your question is have a dream and follow your passion, because without it, life is very gray.
Okay, so now you've started this spiritual center called Lightworks, and have you given up the marketing at this point, or are you still doing both?
You mean back then?
Yes.
Yeah. I was doing both for a while because I had to survive economically. And the soulmate one day said, explain to me why you're killing yourself running this center just to making enough to keep it open and working working until 11 o'clock at night just to pay the bills for this center. What's your point? And I said, well, I'm trying to help. And he said, but you're killing yourself. And I said, but it's good for the community. And one day I realized, wow, I was really getting burnout. And I started to, it was about the beginning of the 5th year of the center, I started getting messages from the collective that calls itself the Syrian High Council. Suddenly I was receiving, never done that kind of work before, mediumship, let's say. And I wasn't really that impressed with it, to be honest with you. I was it's one thing to use the psychic faculty. It's another to sit down in front of people and present yourself as a medium. So it was very private. It was very personal. And as these messages came in, I finally said, is this supposed to be a book? What am I getting here? I don't understand. Just let it flow. And it flew. It did. It flowed through me for about 8 months. And when that first book, the day that I got the confirmation from my first publisher, called and said, we love what you sent us. We'd like to contract you for the book, The Cosmos of Soul, was the day I closed the center. It was like, wow, the universe certainly does provide, because I had completed what I felt I needed to do with Lightworks. And then bam, I'm mopping the floors, cleaning up the center to close it. And I get this call, we want to publish your book. So my path just followed. And now today I've got 14, hard to believe, 14 books later. And this 14th book just came out. And this is just nonstop.
You know, that first book that you channeled came in a very interesting way. Could you share that story?
Yes, I went to the crops. I was in England to take a course of color healing, color therapy, color healing. And I was in a college there. It was very intensive. And in the middle of the night, about the 4th night in, I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I had a dream that I was flying over Stonehenge, and that from this flying place, I looked down and there was this spiral in the earth, in the field next to Stonehenge. And I woke up, and in the middle of the night, I drew this, sketched it out, and I was agitated because it was 4 o'clock in the morning. We were in a college situation, like a dorm, so I couldn't even get up. I had other people in this room, this dorm room. But I heard a voice say, pay attention. This is a lock-on point for interdimensional contact, and it's going to be very important for you. So that morning, we sat down at breakfast with all these women, and I think we were all women, yeah. And when I told them about this, everybody got kind of excited. And one of the professors said, oh, sorry, we went for a field trip to Glastonbury, which is I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a mystical little wonderful place. I love Glastonbury. And there in one of the bookstores is the exact same image that I saw in a poster on the wall. And I said to befuddled, I looked at this image, and I said to the clerk, what is that spiral in the grass? And she says, that's the latest crop circle. And I said, wait a minute, what are crop circles? I thought they were burn marks. I remembered reading that there had been some sightings in Russia where there were circles in the grass that were reportedly burn marks from UFOs. I didn't know anything about crop circles in 1996. So she said, oh, you don't know about crop circles? I said, no. And she said, well, obviously you've been called. And so when we got back to the school, we told the professor. And the image that I had etched and this picture were identical. And he said, well, Patricia, you're not really here to learn about color therapy. You came here to get into that crop circle. I'm going to take you there. And he did. It was a long drive. And when I got there, I almost passed out before I could even get into this because you have to walk into the field, you have to follow the tractor lines, and then suddenly here's this gigantic crop circle. And I fell into one of the circles. I mean, I literally fell in because I was dizzy and it was intense. This crop circle was called the Julius set, very famous crop circle. And I lost consciousness. I spun out. I remembered spinning, feeling nauseous from spinning. And then I could feel myself losing my body. I felt like music. It was like until there was no more sound and I was gone. And when I came back to my body 2 hours later, something had happened to me. And when I got back to Italy a week later, this messages started coming. So I realized I got some kind of a tune-up and made contact with these beings. It was very exciting.
Now, from your perception, I've had some crop circle researchers on the show before, but from your perception, being there and having had that experience, what do you think produces a crop circle? And some people believe it's just projected from consciousness. Others believe a UFO actually caused it. But what do you think causes it, and what do you think, what purpose does it serve?
All right, for starters, I think there are a lot of fake crop circles, and I think that there are teams of people out there making them for reasons that vary from the fun of it to the hoaxy of it or whatever. That said, I also believe there are many, many crop circles that are undefinable, that are otherworldly, that can't be explained away. And the meticulousness of some of these formations. I mean, the one that was on the Milk Hill, which is a mandala, a Tibetan mandala. It was gigantic, beyond anything you could imagine. Overnight, this perfect entire hill covered in this gigantic mandala, and I got into it. And you know, your hair just stands up. So, what I think causes them, first of all, I love the idea that nobody has the answer, and anybody that thinks they have the answer needs to allow space for everyone to have their interpretation. That said, I quite comfortably feel that these are points of interdimensional connection. In other words, the earth energy is pulling in. Here's an idea. Let's say that the earth is magnetic, because these crop circles usually occur in places where there's a watershed not deep below the earth. So I'm thinking something is imprinting the earth, some form of consciousness, and Mother Earth is pulling it down because the water is serving this electromagnetic process and pulling it in, and it's just being imprinted as crop that's just lying down. So I do believe, as I said, plenty of them are man-made, artificial. They've gotten really good at it. And there are so many reports of people that are experts out there in the fields that, you know, have talked to these people, or there have been night watchers that see troops of guys walking through the grass, but nothing can explain some of these extraordinary ones. Like Julius, the Julius set came down within, I think it was between 4 and 6 p.m. in the afternoon, in a field across from Stonehenge. This is the most traveled part of England in the summer. It's tourist land, and these roads are just non-stop for people that are commuting down to the south of England for their vacations. So it came down within a span of an hour and a half, 2 hours, because a plane flew over it, and when it flew back, it was down in the field. The pilot said he almost crashed the plane because it's like gigantic, 151 circles, 3 times the size of Stonehenge. These things can't be explained away as human in nature. So there's a definite phenomenon going on here. And to be honest, what better way to we're looking for ET to contact us. We're looking for SETI is looking for sounds and hearing signals. But what better way to communicate intelligence to communicate consciousness from another planetary body, another star system, even another dimension, than mathematics, sacred geometry, form that everyone can understand. So that's what I think.
Yeah, sure. Interesting story about meeting these two, what you describe as men in black. Can you share that?
Oh boy, where'd you hear that? Okay, well, when I was coming out of this, Julia said, the professor had gone to Stonehenge. So he said, I'll let you be. I'm going to go over to Stonehenge. And I was like, yeah, fine. When he came back, he found me unconscious. I mean, well, I wasn't unconscious, but out. So he came to me and he said, are you okay? And I was like, oh, I was just crashed back into my body, but I was still very spaced out. And I said, yeah. And I said, I think I've been out a few minutes. He said, you've been out over 2 hours. I was like, oh dear. So he said, Patricia, are you okay? And it was too abrupt. He had no idea, understandably, what I'd been through. But I was just shocked back into my body, trying to get myself together. And he said, look, I'm gonna go get the car and, meet me at the gate because it's quite a walk and you don't look like you feel like walking that far. Okay, so off he goes, and I'm walking out quite dazed. Walking out of the field, there was an entry point where the farmer's wife had a little collection box to get some money to pay for the loss of the crop that was damaged. And as I was walking in that direction, these two men, very robotic men, Arnold Schwarzenegger looking, walked by me, and I could just tell you this, they were dressed like Men in Black. And I didn't even know about Men in Black back then. Classic Men in Black, skinny tie, the suit. And they had sunglasses on, but still, as they walked by me, they looked at me like this, in tandem. And I could feel, it didn't feel like good energy at all. And one of them was holding what looked like a Geiger counter. It looked like a very heavy briefcase. And I just remember thinking, that's a strange way to carry something that heavy, because it was straight out, his arm was straight out. And when I had that thought, they looked at me menacingly. And I had veiled it. They veiled the memory of it until sometime later when I was in a conference and somebody mentioned Men in Black, and I remembered. But there was a lot going on in that crop circle, and a lot of really important people in the crop circle community agree that it was probably like no other. Very, very powerful moment in the whole phenomenon. It was the launching of a whole new generation of crop circles that were much more complex than they had been before it.
So now you've written 14 books, and the most recent is called New Sirian Revelations, from what I understand. And now, are these all channeled books, or are some of them books that you've written yourself?
There are, let's see, one book is called Beyond the Matrix, and it is a collection of interviews I did from my radio show Beyond the Matrix of just amazing people. I mean, Stanton Friedman, you probably had some of these people on your show. Stanton Friedman, Michio Kaku, Thomas Greco, and the new economic communities, subjects ranging, let's say, across the gamut. That was a lovely book, big, thick book. Then there's, Where Pharaohs Dwell, which is it's an autobiographical book of my experience having been regressed in a hypnotic regression and reliving being buried alive in ancient Egypt. Did you read that one?
I did not, no. Tell me about that.
I did a regression. I went to this regressionist just kind of like on a lark. Somebody said, this guy's really good, Patricia. And I said, yeah, I don't know about that. And I went. And I had immediately, he got me into this, because I said, I don't even think I could be hypnotized. Wrong. He took me to this place where I relived being buried alive in Egypt. And the interesting thing about it is that I had my name, and I was calling out this other name, Matkara, which at the time I had no Egypt experience then. This was all happening at a time when I was just blossoming in my mystical life. So it turns out that the two names, the name Matkara corresponded to Queen Hatshepsut's pharaonic name. But back in 1996, there wasn't a lot of information about this. And I certainly knew nothing about Egypt. So Where Pharaohs Dwell is a journey of my hunt for this, to rediscover this character and her queen, Matkara. And I found, I had the most incredible experience of this. So the book is a recounting of mystical Egypt and my experiences personally, but also mystical Egypt, and a lot of wisdom about the deeper esoteric meaning and experience of ancient Egypt. It's been a very successful book. And I wrote a novel called The Emissary, which is about a psychic who starts getting contacted by the whales and their warnings for the earth. I'm writing away here. But I think the Syrian channeled books are the most popular with people.
So tell me about this consciousness that is channeling that you're channeling to write some of these books that you've written. Who are they, and what dimension do they exist in, and do they have any sort of physical counterpart in our current timeline and dimension?
Okay, the group that I am hearing is the Syrian High Council, they call themselves, and they reside on the sixth dimension. So there's a lot of excitement about Sirius right now. A lot of people are claiming that they're getting contacted from Syrians, or that they are Syrians, and there's a lot of confusion as well. So I have some pretty specific information about that, and that is this. It's a multi-dimensional star system, 3 stars, Sirius A, B, and C. And in fact, the Dogon people from Africa brought this information to the Western world years before scientists ever discovered the fact that, in fact, because of the wobble of Sirius, the Syrian star, they were able to recognize that there is a dwarf star that is connected, or let's say in orbit in some way with the gravitational force of Sirius A. So the Syrians that I speak to say that there are 3 stars. Sirius A is our beautiful blue star that they call it the blue-white star, and we see it shining down from Orion's belt. In fact, today, or let's say this night, it's shining bright on the horizon out here. You know the horizon belt of the Orion star system, so it's at the bottom of that belt. If you follow those 3 stars down to the horizon, and it is still a 3-dimensional physical being. Sirius B ascended to the 6th dimension, and Sirius C has ascended to the 4th dimension. So people say, well, they're from Sirius, and I'm like, yeah, okay, where? Because Sirius, the star system of Sirius that's out there, according to Council, has no more planetary life on it because of the intensity of the dynamics that it has with these other stars. But the ones that I'm hearing are from Sirius B. They are no longer in physical form, and but they are these immense light beings. And sometimes I just see these huge orbs of light, and I know they're present. don't necessarily see the lights every time I work with them, I channel them.
So the Dogon tribe describes this now. Is that because at some point these beings from that you're channeling have visited Earth in a three-dimensional time?
Yes, well, they were. Sirius B was once in the third dimension, so it has ascended, but it has its history of being a three-dimensional star, a physical 3D star. And the Dogon were visited by these beings. They describe being visited by a light appearing, beings walking out of this craft, throwing down water, and out of the water come these creatures they call the Nomo. Are you familiar with this information?
Yes.
Okay. So they were half fish or half dolphin, half human. Very interesting. And I understand that this star, Sirius B, had several planets in orbit, and some of them were fiery and some of them were watery, which is not hard to believe since we have the same situation here in our star system. And that these fiery planets correspond to the lion people you've heard of, Sekhmet of the Egyptian visitation groups, and also these beings, these dolphin-like, let's call them, they're not really dolphin-human forms. They're walking or dolphin-type fish-like beings that were able to walk also on Earth. When we think about an entire star system, my goodness, how many planets, how many different life forms. Just look at an octopus. The other day I was looking at some of these jellyfish with all of their light systems. I don't know if you've seen some of these beings, but if these aren't aliens, I don't know what is. They're like light shows. They've got total neon lights, every color. And I'm thinking, boy, how many life forms on this planet are really not indigenous to this planet?
Is there any relationship between these beings and the ancient religion of Dagonism, which is depicted as a fish-like supreme being that eventually evolved into Catholicism, and the Pope still wears kind of a fish-like hat? So is there any connection?
Well, yeah, so many religious beliefs, religious systems believe that we walked out of the water, that we come from the water. There was the mound, and then there was life. And I can't help but think that the idea that, well, first of all, I personally believe that the dolphins and the whales are in many ways superior consciously to the human being. So, that's a conversation for another day for sure. But when you look at a planet that's got 80% water, surely it's possible to conceive that our understanding of the life and intelligence that's in the water is very different than what we really have there. And what is the origin of man? Well, the Syrians say that we were seeded here, which is also part of the Syrian revelations. They say that we were part of a great experiment where the DNA of many different evolved civilizations was collected, and that Homo sapiens was planted in what really was the Garden of Eden. And unfortunately, some things went awry because of interference with that experiment, shall we say, which is another big argument that the books go into when they talk about how we were stripped of 10 strands of DNA. Barbara Marciniak talked about that years and years and years ago. And the Syrians talk about it too. They say, you surely don't believe, you surely can't believe that 80, let's say, what are we told? 96, I think it is, % of our DNA is junk. And let's be generous and say that they tell us that it's more like 93%. We're only using 6 or 7% of our DNA. And lo and behold, we're only using 6 and 7% of our brain because the rest of it is gray matter. So the councils say, you sure don't believe that. First of all, it's connected. It's like a switchboard. When you plug back in those neurons and that information, you activate this DNA, it plugs back into the pineal gland, and lo and behold, you become fully illuminated beings. So that's how we were designed. There was interference, and we were taken down to 2 strands. And boy, we sure do a lot of wonderful things with just 2 strands, but there is this question: are we in the era, in the time when our DNA, that lost DNA, is reassembled and we are once again fully illuminated? Is this part of our process in the Age of Enlightenment?
Is that what you believe, and is that what they're saying?
That's what they're saying. Mm-hmm. That we are reassembling the DNA, and that this is happening for a number of reasons. And one of them is the vibratory frequencies of the planet and the solar system itself, or themselves. But, I mean, come on, you look at the conversations that we're having these days on planet Earth compared to even 10 years ago. And it's unquestionable that it's the Age of Enlightenment. And people will say, yeah, well, it's pretty dark considering that you're calling it the Age of Enlightenment. And the councils say, you're going through the desert days. You have to go through this process to break down all the old, the dogma, the control issues, and the karma of millennia of human existence on the planet. But that nonetheless, we are rising, awakening. And in fact, there are people now being born with a 3rd strand of DNA activated. There are people that are doing work in laboratories in Russia that are photographic, supposedly able to, with the electron microscopes, able to identify 3-stranded DNA babies. I can't verify that because I haven't seen it, but that's what I'm hearing.
So to back up, so you're saying the Syrians have multiple different races and many dimensions, and some were lion-like and some were more fish-like. Is that correct?
Yes, because in the collection of planets, they're, closer you are to the star, the hotter it is. So when people say, well, I thought Syrians were fiery lion beings, like the wonderful book put out by an author called Mary Hope was called The Lion People, which she describes these lion people that are represented in Egypt as Sekhmet and some of the other figures like Bast that are considered gods in the tradition of ancient Egypt, but perhaps they weren't gods. Perhaps they were actually beings that walked. And of course, there could be, we need to be very careful not to stereotype, because we have our media that does that for us, and our games and all of these creations that create archetypes or stereotypes. But the bottom line is, if you've got a star with 20 planets, who knows how many planets, then the distance from the star determines a lot about the nature of the planet, but not necessarily confining it to what we understand, which is our solar system.
And so did these beings build a lot of the ancient structures that are around the world, do you believe, like in Egypt, or were those built after the fact and they just simply worshiped the Syrians?
I understand that aliens, or, we need a better word than aliens now that we're so ready for this contact. Let's just say off-world beings had many points in history where they were in contact with the Earth, present on the Earth. And I really feel confident to say one of these was Atlantis. And Atlantis, I understand to be a civilization that lasted 100,000 years. So holy moly, if you think about what we've accomplished in 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, imagine 100,000 years. Civilization waning and rising, waning and rising. And during that time, I'm confident that in my belief system, that there were many peaks when there was alien intervention. And surely Egypt, I mean, we've got it, it's in the hieroglyphs. Even then there's, of course, Akhenaten, and you see the appearance of these, people call them deformed skulls, but they're not, they're elongated skulls. And we see these in Peru, we see them in Mongolia, we see them in Egypt. So they don't fit the Homo sapiens skull structure at all. Akhenaten appears in the Egyptian hierarchy, and from what we glean of it, he has this elongated skull, really pronounced elongated skull, and he worships the Aten. So when you see pictures of Akhenaten, the heretic, he's called the heretic pharaoh, he's always sitting under this, what looks like a sun, because it's a disc with rays coming out, and history says that it was a representation of the sun, and that he was a sun worshiper. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. I think it was a craft. And he's depicting that he came down on this craft, but to each his own. And of course, his children also had the elongated skulls. And he came and he completely changed. Well, he did not honor the Theban structure of Egyptian religion and power. And he eventually had to move out to the middle of the desert, which is called El Arman. I'm having trouble remembering exactly how to pronounce it. El Arman. Okay, I'll give you that in a minute. Amarna. He, anyway, created this utopic place in the middle of the desert to get away from the controls of Thebes, and to be able to have a utopic world where love reigned, very, very different than, I mean, out of place completely with the timeline and the history and the structure of Egyptian civilization. I believe he was an ET. We have records in the Egyptian glyphs. We won't even mention the Mayans and Peru. So yeah, I think that the Earth has benefited greatly from moments of ET contact.
A lot of the ancient Sumerians or the Anunnaki are pictured with scales and sometimes with fish-like appearances. I know you talk a bit about Nibiru as being part of the whole Sirian constellation. Can you share the connection there?
Oh boy, okay, this is a long story. So there's a lot of debate about Nibiru, and are they good guys? Are they bad guys? Who are the Anunnaki? People are just really confused about this because there's a lot of information and misinformation. And so all I can contribute is what I believe is information about that. The Syrians say that Sirius C was Anu. The star was Anu. And that Nibiru was a planet that orbited Anu. And when Anu ascended to the fourth dimension, Nibiru didn't, for reasons that have to do with its vibrational frequencies, it didn't make it. It got ejected out of the ascension process and was kicked. Imagine the magnetic celestial dynamics of a planet, of a star going, let's call it supernova, but according to the Syrians, it's going through its own astral cord or going through the black hole, however you want to describe that, which I'm sure we'll get into. And Nibiru didn't make it. So it got pulled back to the Syrian 3D star, Sirius A, but it went careening. It couldn't grab on, so it went careening out to our sun. And Sitchin, I'm sure you are familiar with his work, talked quite a lot about the trajectory of Nibiru, but he never told us, what do you mean it just comes in every so many thousands of years? Where does it come from? The dark night of space? What? So the councils say Nibiru is a planet that's been captured by these magnetic forces of these two stars. And it's in this trajectory between Sirius and our sun, Sol, or Ra. And that the Anunnaki, or let's say the warriors of that planet, but they also suggest that there are also innocents there that are Nibiruans that are just trying to survive. And they call upon us to have compassion for them, which is beautiful. So they're saying that this planet is not dead yet. It's, even though it's going through this horrific dark night of space and it is dying, it's still, there still is a surface civilization there. And this has a lot to do with why the Anunnaki have interfered with the Earth.
And so the Anunnaki, you're saying, are there more warrior people among them, or okay?
Yes, and they have definitely interfered with the Earth. Boy, it's quite a. The Atlantis Rising describes. I really recommend to your listeners that they grab that book. It describes the whole process, why, how this has occurred, and why the Anunnaki have interfered on the Earth, what they're trying to achieve with the human race. And yes, in correspondence with the earlier conversation about wonderful aliens bringing wisdom to our planet, there's also obviously that negative force that we can describe as reptilians or the Anunnaki.
So now, you wrote the book about Atlantis. Do you perceive Atlantis as having been in the third dimension, or was it in some other alternate dimension and it's no longer? I know we still see evidence of pyramids, obviously, on Earth, but were those pyramids created after Atlantis, or were they actually part of Atlantis at one time and Atlantis was a third dimensional place?
I believe that the Atlantis existed as a three-dimensional construct on this Earth, and that it was a continent that stretched. Again, when I say I believe, it's also enforced by the information of the Syrians. Atlantis was not an island. So when people are saying, yeah, it was in the middle of the Mediterranean, it blew up, but they say no, actually it was an entire landmass that stretched from as far north as Greenland all the way down to South America. And we're talking about a huge continent. It makes total sense that would have been the case, because you see evidence of similar cultural, historic structures from both sides of the Atlantic. Egypt and its step pyramid Saqqara, Mexico with its gigantic step pyramid in Teotihuacan. And on each side of this gigantic ocean, there are similar structures. So how about the idea that maybe Atlantis was this giant construct, and that maybe the distances between the Atlantean shores and South America or Egypt were not that far to traverse? Because I really believe that Atlantis must have been the most enormous influence in the history of the world, to have myth about it in every culture. Till today, I mean, it's still a huge influence on us. And then to see these structures repeated like pyramids. You've got China, Peru. I mean, where are there not pyramids on this planet? Right? Bosnia. Do you know about the Bosnia pyramids?
Sure, yeah.
Have you had Sam on your show?
Yeah, he's been out here at our conference before also.
Love him. So here's a guy who, is shaking up the whole historical story, because the pyramids I haven't been there yet, but the Bosnia pyramids completely changed the timeline. It's freaking out the Egyptian authorities, because it's like, whoa, we've got the story, not you. And, again, I mean, these pyramids are dotted all over the planet. But if you look at the globe, if you place a continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which, by the way, let's not forget that there's the Atlantic Ridge that this gigantic mountain in the middle of the ocean that goes all the way down north to south. I believe that that's a part of Atlantis, and that this continent existed connecting all of these civilizations with this dominant, obviously dominant, highly advanced civilization. And again, if we're talking about 100,000 years, which is what the council tells us, man, imagine. It's beyond our imagination to even imagine where we were 100 years ago, 200 years ago, before electricity. We were primitive compared to now. So if you could possibly imagine 100,000 years and how this civilization evolved with influences from off-planet bringing technology, because I'm sure I think you'll agree that some of our technology now has got to be from either from other timelines or other civilizations. Our leap is ridiculous. So surely it occurred before on the planet. And I believe that was Atlantis.
So give me a little bit of an overview. I know it's a big question, but of what Atlantis was like. The people, were they obviously all different races, I assume, right? All different extraterrestrial races as well. And did human beings in our present form also coexist at that time?
Well, that's a great question. I would think that it's a no-brainer that if you go from north to south with that kind of expanse from Greenland, let's say, all the way down to the south, you're going to have all different kinds of races. And of course, according to the council, different races were seeded on the planet anyway. But you're going to have different climates. You're going to have different, let me back up. With different climates and their limitations and restrictions, you have different speeds with which society advances. So if you've got people that are, 30 degrees below in igloos trying to survive, probably they're going to be slower evolving than people that are in, climates that allow for more cultural interaction, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that it's so complex to talk about this because you're talking about different geography, extraordinary different geography. You've got freezing cold, you've got boiling hot, the equator, you have coastal, you have mountains, you've got everything possible and imaginable in Atlantis, and you've got 100,000 years of civilization. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that question other than to say that it would be probably a collection or a prototype of every single thing that's available on this whole planet. You've got coast, I just can't even imagine it, but I do feel that when I talk about Atlantis, I feel celebration. I really feel like I'm an old Atlantean myself, and there's memory there. And of course, let's talk about ancient Atlantis, priestesses, crystals. Crystal technology is something that people equate with Atlantis. And the book Atlantis Rising talks about how you're reliving Atlantis now. It's the exact same paradigm. The purity of the original crystalline civilization, the innocence of that, the connection of nature, turned against the Atlanteans when the dark priesthood realized they could use crystals for technology. And for many, many millennia, developed this technology. Let's always remember that our technology, without crystal, without quartz, we've got no technology, right? So when we talk about Atlantean crystal technology, people think of, people forget that Silicon Valley is quartz. And we've gotten to that same point again where we've taken that quartz, silicon, we've taken it to an extreme of technological development where sometimes I wonder if it's taking over the human race. I'm not the only one, of course. I'm not suggesting that we aren't all talking about AI and its effect on the human race. But the council say, you're doing it again. Here you are again. You're back at the Atlantean paradigm. And the difference is they destroyed themselves that time, but you're not going to destroy yourselves this time.
Now, in ancient, there have been some tablets found of supposedly from Atlantis that speak of a governing body referred to as a Naacal. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, what was the? Are you aware at all of how Atlantis governed themselves? Was there a similar government to how we have today, or was it a collective of highly enlightened or advanced beings? Or do you know anything about that?
Well, I can tell you what my understanding is, and that is that in many epochs of Atlantic, again, in that enormity of that time span, they were definitely advanced spiritually. It was a civilization that had as an aspect to its ruling class a spiritual overtone, and that it swung from dark to light constantly. And I believe that, of course, there was wealth, great wealth in Atlantis, and there were rulers, kings, and that structure. But it was always the priesthood that controlled. That's what I understand. And I've heard so much about warriors and warring Atlantis, and I really don't have personal knowledge about that. But I do have a lot of knowledge about the priesthood, and I feel that it's because I have personal memory of it. And how the priesthood, when it started to swing to the dark side, was when the greatest, say the most powerful moment when it swung to the dark side and when Atlantis went down, is when the Atlanteans were using mind-light generators, they called them, where they were actually illuminating the continent was illuminated by human consciousness. They were able to collect imprints or energy waves from human beings in quartz spheres. And this is, again, very similar to where we are with mind control devices. And the light side of this technology was that they used human energy, mind waves, for energy source. The ultimate alternative energy was that you could just think it on. You could just light the light just by sending that energy, collecting that energy to make it go on. Right? Am I making myself clear? I feel like I'm stumbling here with the words.
Yes. Yeah, continue.
And that at some point the dark priesthood realized that they could control the human race by doing that, or just control the civilization by doing that. And that's when mind control started to take over the civilization, and that's when it went down. So that's why we're in such a precipitous moment now, because mind control and the phone and I am an advocate of dumping cell phones, the ultimate mind control device. But I believe we're there again, aren't we? We are definitely at a breaking point on this planet where something cataclysmic appears to need to happen. And I believe that it's going to be a good outcome. And some people are afraid that it won't be. But I think that the cataclysm is just breaking free of all of these control devices.
So what makes you believe that way when what's visible, and a lot of people who are more conscious who watch shows like this, they're observing the polarity that's existing on the planet right now. There's a lot of what appears to be, as you said, technology is being used for mind control, and people as a whole are using those technologies. So what makes you believe that this time will be different than the time of Atlantis?
First of all, it's the entire globe. Secondly, I think people are going to reach the extreme It's already starting to happen. We are at such a point with the drug of this technology that some people are starting to reject it. And it's like, do we have to reach exasperation point before we have the moment of reckoning? And I think it appears we do, because it looks like the human race needs to be backed up against the wall before it finally moves into action. So I've described this before as saying, when we're in peace, when we're in the chicken and the pot scenario, post-war glory, and things are nice and the economy's okay, we don't accomplish very much. I mean, we idealize that that's what we're looking for, and who doesn't want peace? But the truth is, we don't do much in those times. We get complacent. And it's when we're up against the wall, when we're faced with annihilation or disaster, that we unite and we rise and we move into action. So we've been in this lulled experience where people have been glorifying technology. I just can't even believe that there are people now that are 20 years old that don't understand what it was like not to have a telephone in your hand. That are starting to recognize the cancer is 400% more in children. Now they finally I just read something about it being recognized that gaming is actually a disorder. Of course, the pharmaceutical industry will have a pill for that, not to worry. But more and more people are becoming conscious of the fact that this is exasperating the human condition. And I think what we're going to see is the swing all the way to the extreme, where it looks like AI is going to take over civilization any minute now, and a swing back to sanity. And when we do swing back, we have that experience of like, no, we're not going to allow that to happen. We are not. But then, I'm an optimist, and there are a lot of people who are pessimists. But I believe in the can-win scenario. And I think that this is the time that the human race rallies. Also, I believe that the earth itself is rising, and the Syrian information is that our entire solar system is about to ascend. That is the basis of all this information. That's why they describe so deeply, so clearly, the process of the Syrian star ascending, because they've been through it. And the premise now is that when people talk about ascensions, the councils say, well, hold on a minute. It's not your individual process. It's not even just an earthly process. Your sun is about to move through its astral cord. And you can call that moving through the black hole or supernova, whatever you want. But your sun is shifting out of the third dimension. And all the planets are going with it. So the new book talks a lot about how we are already actually experiencing the fourth dimension. We're already in it, moving into it. And that's an interesting analysis, because we're very linear. We are 3D beings, so I use the terminology moving toward it or moving into it. But of course, our understanding of multidimensionality is that we are these aspects. We're not really going to them. We're just refining our energy, our consciousness to perceive that. But it's complicated. It's complicated to describe that.
Is there any way you can describe what this fourth dimensional shift is like, or how you're observing this happening already on the planet? What is the fourth dimension versus what we know as the third?
Okay, the councils say that basically the fourth dimension is where we clear our karma and we lose the sense of time. We lose the space-time continuum, which has everybody completely confused, because how could we possibly exist without time? But the truth is, lots of us are experiencing time slipping. And suddenly, lots of people are talking about the Mandela effect time loops, time slips, and it's happening to me all the time. It's happening to a lot of people all the time, or often, but not that many people are able to understand it yet. But for me, and in the book, I give an example of completely jumping off of the time-space continuum, having something happen, and then popping back in. And the council say that, first of all, in this fourth dimensional consciousness, you're starting to lose a sense of time. Well, who isn't talking about how time is warping? I mean, is it really almost March 2018? And even here on the island, there are a lot of farmers here, and I was talking to one of the farmers, and he said, you know, Patricia, he said, I live with cows. He said, you have a routine when you're a farmer. And he said, suddenly the time is off. I don't, what's going on? I don't understand it. There's not the same amount of time in a day. So the first thing I have to say about the fourth dimension is I think that we are slipping. It's like, imagine if you have a two bands. What the words escape me sometimes. It drives me crazy. When you're on the in the gym, walking on the machine, what's it called?
Treadmill.
Thank you so much. Okay, so imagine you have two treadmills side by side. And you know that feeling when you're on a treadmill where sometimes it jerks? It slips. It feels like it's slipped.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if the time-space continuum has what we describe as different timelines, is like different treadmills next to each other, where at some points this band goes faster than the other or slips back or whatever. And I have this impression of this happening. I'm experiencing it. And we don't have any way to describe it because it's new. I mean, at least our consciousness about it is rather new. But I'll give you an example. I was recently in Norway, and I'll make this brief. I walked by I was going on a cruise in Norway, and I stopped I went by this photo shop a couple of days before I was leaving for the cruise. I stopped by, and in front of the shop, which was closed, I thought, wow, you know, I really need the remote clicker for the camera, because if I'm going to capture the northern lights, the camera can't move. So I should have gotten one. And the store was closed. So I said, okay, I'm definitely coming back here tomorrow and getting one of those clickers. Okay, next day I go to the store, I walk in, and I'm about to say hi, and the guy goes, you came back for that clicker? Remote shutter device? And I was flabbergasted, because it's not like the guy was in the shop and maybe had a telepathic connection with me. There was nobody there. So I said, sorry? He said, what was it, a Nikon, right? And he goes over to the wall, and he's looking through the boxes for the right shutter device. I said, excuse me, how did you know I wanted a clicker? And he said, almost annoyed, he said, I'm the guy you talked to. I was the one who helped you. I was flabbergasted. With all of my psychic experience, and there are many, this kind of experience is new for me. It's like, what happened here? Did this man leap into the future the day before? I don't know how to describe it. Is it a Mandela effect? I don't know. But one thing for sure, there was a time zipperoo there that defies anything that I can understand, other than to say that it looks like this could be a four-dimensional moment where what appears to be reality or time as we understand it isn't anymore. It's simultaneous time or warp time or something of that nature. But I was really flabbergasted. I still can't get over it. I keep thinking about it. And imagine, I mean, this was not your New Age shop where I could say, hey, you think we're having a multidimensional moment here? But I just looked at this man, and he said, are you okay? I said, I'm sorry, I'm old. I probably I just seem to have forgotten. And I grabbed my little clicker and got out of there. How do you interpret that?
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, I think a lot of people are having those kinds of experiences these days where they're perceiving another reality that didn't actually happen in the current timeline that they're experiencing. So
And I
that's,
think
yeah.
that's the fourth dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And, the council say, get your seatbelts on because this is going to be really new to you. Because as much as they've tried to describe to us what simultaneous time is like, even they say, even trying to talk to you about it is restricted to your three-dimensional perception because we have to use language that you understand. So we talk about moving into, because your perception still is a sense of location, a sense of distance, a sense of forward and backward. But as you progress, you will realize what we're talking about is vibrational density, vibrational frequencies. And you're not moving to it. You're acclimatizing vibrationally to a new frequency. And that dimension can be as close as here. So how exciting that we're exploring these things and experiencing them. And how exciting that we're alive to see consciousness in our civilization embracing this perplexing dynamic.
Now, a lot of people are concerned about the extinction of animals, and I've heard you say that you believe that that's because they're moving to the fourth dimension ahead of us.
I hope so, because I'm an animal activist and I can't bear to see how species are dying. I mean, was the white rhino just in? The last white rhino died. This rich biodiversity that is our planet shrinking all the time. But I find great comfort in the idea that, first of all, in order to have any peace of mind, any joy, one must contemplate immortality. So I personally have had 2 near-death experiences, and I've been on the other side of life-death, and I have no question at all in my mind. And when I say that, I say it because it's so personal. You cannot convince anyone else of the afterlife. But I personally have no question in my mind that I'm eternal, I'm immortal, because I've been there. So with that knowing, there's a great comfort in realizing that all life continues, and that even if we're seeing extinction of life, extinction of species, it's just with regard to the 3D experience, our mortal experience. And that the next step where we go is like, oh, okay, you're all here. Wonderful. Especially the whales and dolphins. But I'd like to get into this conversation, if I may. In this book, before we leave you, the whales tell us, the dolphins tell us, a certain amount, a number of us must remain on the earth in the 3D world before this ascension happens, because the earth needs us to weave the songs, the sounds of Earth's oceans. There is a pattern, a vibration symphony going on that holds the Earth's oceans in balance. Of course, we understand elements, and water, of course, is emotion. So the ocean is the Earth's emotional body. So they tell us, a number of us, a certain percentage of us have to stay here to hold the Earth's oceans together. And this concerns me gravely because, and I'm an advocate for the oceans. Wonderful if many of them are going ahead and holding the frequencies in another dimension, but a certain number must survive on this planet. So I am adamant about whale and dolphin populations and our need to protect them. And as for the other species, how sad to lose all the color of the earth, all the plants, all the animals. I mean, what a planet this is. We've stopped loving the planet, you know? I mean, you hear people saying all the time, I'm so sick of this planet, I want to go back to my star. And my mantra is, hold on a minute here. Are you kidding me? This beautiful earth? Don't give up on the earth. And remember that you chose to be here, starseed. So honor that and do the best you can while you're here.
You've said that we are going through this time right now of some difficulty and polarity because we first need to resolve our karma before we go into the fourth dimension. I think that's what you said. Can you describe, first of all, is that correct? Am I saying that correctly? And can you describe what, when you use the word karma, what does that mean to you?
Okay, actually the councils say you're going to go through the fourth dimension before you go to the higher dimensions. Or because some people are talking about leaping into the fifth or sixth dimension. And the councils say, well, hold on a minute. Why are you ignoring the fourth dimension? What happened to that? This is the dimension where you face your collective and individual karma, your imprint, your baggage, good and bad, the collective imprint of everything that has gone on this planet is stored we know about the Akashic record, and that we're going to confront it as a civilization and as individuals in the fourth dimension, in this next, let's say, framework of density, which is a lot of the people are using that term to describe dimensions. So the councils say your shadow is going to be right in front of you. It's not going to be behind you anymore. You're going to face it, bam. And you're going to have this opportunity to resolve it. Face your karma, face how to describe karma, your collective imprint of everything you've created, of everything you do, all your action, all your thoughts are your karmic imprint, right?
Mm-hmm.
You agree? So they say that also we're going to be looking at our civilization's karma. And that's one of the reasons why we're in such a mess on this planet. We are in the process of integrating this four-dimensional vibration. And we are just, every epoch, every aspect of civilization is in our face. Every war, all the violence, but also, let's not forget that there's karma is not only negative. So you have, on the one hand, a medieval aspect, dark ages surfacing, and on the other, a Renaissance aspect, all these incredible new ideas or inventions for the planet and for individuals and civilization. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes. So now as we move into the fourth dimension and we're working through this karma and we're moving to a state of more timelessness, does a state of timelessness or a dimension that is more timeless in the third dimension require that we also must live from a more heart-centered approach to life versus the third dimensional approach to living?
I'm not sure if it requires it, as you say, but it's going to be probably the only way to cope with it. Because if you're clutching to what you feel is the known, or if you're holding on to what you've understood is reality, and not open to experiencing, for example, if you're a closed-minded person who says all of this is a bunch of hooey, and then one day you have one of these experiences, you could blow your circuits. Because I don't think that, and this is probably a subject we should discuss, Some people feel that it's the evolved people that are going to have these experiences ahead of everyone else. I don't think so. I think that if the planet itself is slipping into another dimension, the sun is experiencing its higher self or another aspect of its consciousness, then I don't think it's limited to people who are evolved, that they'll be starting to experience these things happening. Like the guy in the store, he was I don't know that he was a psychic or not psychic guy, but he was a meat and potatoes kind of guy. And I think that he's the one that had the experience more than I did, right? He was the one, I mean, who knows? But I think that, first of all, heart-centeredness is the place to be to enjoy your life, but that compassion and curiosity and curiosity, not being limited to a belief system, but being open to new experience. Because if you're stuck with the way you think things are supposed to be, or reality as you know it is defined, you could be in serious trouble when things start to slip. And I'm telling you, like you said, lots of people are talking about this. People are talking about this Mandela effect. People are having this experience of time warping. But these time slips, they're happening to more people. I've had a few of them now. I think we're in for quite a ride.
So in all these books that you've channeled, was there an underlying message that was common throughout all the ones that you channeled in terms of what the Sirians were trying to convey to us or trying to teach us?
There are several themes, let's say. First of all, they talk a lot about the power structure that's in place on the earth and how it's coming down and how it has held us in almost, I don't want to say slavery because that's so depressing a thought, but how we've been controlled and manipulated into behaviors as societies by those who would keep us in obedience. And the first page of the first book, the council said, get off your knees to the authority, to any authority, and stand tall in your humanity, and get off your knees to anyone who would dare to be the authority over you. And I was like, oh boy, this is going to get me in trouble. But so that's a recurring theme. It's like, claim your power, be in your power. And to do that, the council's message, and so is my message, is fearlessness. And to reach fearlessness, you have to confront the question of immortality. Because as long as you are afraid of death or suffering, you can't progress all that much. Would you agree?
Yes, of course.
We never really talk about it. We don't talk about death. It's something over there. But we don't talk about enough about the possibility that it's a transitional moment. Although many metaphysical and Eastern religions do address it, mostly we have this terrible dark feeling about death, and it's gloomy and horrible and painful. Whereas the Tibetans lived to prepare for that transition. That was the ultimate. And some of these other wonderful civilizations, the Egyptians too. So I believe, and I think I'm going to lose my point like you did, that to understand, to really achieve fearlessness, you have to have an understanding that you don't die. And when you do, it changes your life. So this clinging to all this fear, I mean, God, our society is terrorized. It's not the war on terror, it's a war of terror. We're terrified of everything. But hopefully, as we evolve now, we look more and more at this this veil, the fact that on the other side of the veil is life. And I can tell you from a personal experience that you're just as physical. When I died, came back to life, my experience was total physicality. I did not feel ethereal or like an angel. I was just as physical as I kept doing this. Oh my God, I'm dead. Like this. So I think this is an important message from the council, and it's very empowering, and it's over and over again. Question your immortality, learn about it, understand it, and hopefully this is the way of the new frontier. But at the basis of everything is that empowerment, fearlessness, do it, taste life, and know that you're an immortal being.
So if the sun is moving to a fourth dimension and it's taking all of us with it, then does it really matter if we have global leaders or individuals who are maybe of a lower vibration trying to control the population through mind control or trying to basically maintain a lower consciousness? Does it matter that they're doing that, or that there are individuals on the planet who may not be of a very high consciousness, because everybody's going to essentially be pulled into where the sun is going regardless?
Ethan, you ask wonderful questions. I'm so enjoying this interview. Thank you. Does it matter? Okay, well, I by saying that, I just lost my chain of thought. Give me a minute here. Of course it matters. It matters from the point of view that if we look at the fourth dimension as being this vibration where we confront our karma, our civilization, our individual, our cultural, our global, our community karma, how much darkness there is, we're going to have to experience it. So in that state, in that conscious state of the fourth, let's remember that we talk about if the sun is moving up into a higher consciousness, but that four-dimensional passing is going to be rough. And it already is happening. The council described this as the fourth dimension is fluttering over the third, in and out of the third. I'm going to get off topic here for a minute. It's like the sun, if you've seen images of the sun where you can actually see a keyhole in the middle of the sun. Have you seen some of these coming out of Soho?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the councils say that actually plasma from the sun it's disappearing into the fourth dimension and then coming back. That makes sense to me. It's just like, rather than there's just a hole in the middle of the sun, it makes sense to me that as the sun is preparing to refine its energy to be able to shift completely out of the third dimension, what's happening at the moment is licks of plasma are slipping into the fourth and coming back. And does it matter if there's just absolute darkness on the planet versus light? Of course. We are still the guardians of this earth. The civilization, the human race is the guardian. I think that we can say that we're the most intelligent species on the planet. And so we're the guardians of the planet. So how we bring the planet into the fourth dimension will have everything to do with how we as a civilization face our karma. So do we go into this other state of consciousness with resolve, with change for the good, or do we go in servitude and despair and darkness and evil, etc.? And regardless of the fact that the sun, everything is shifting, we're still responsible. I don't think we can just sit back and say, okay, well, whatever, the sun is evolving, so let's just go for the ride. I think that every thought, every gesture, Every action matters. And that's what karma is.
Is there any chance that the consciousness of the planet is not sufficient at this point, that we could be spun off like Nibiru was when the rest of their solar system or whatever jumped to the next dimension?
You know, I do think about that because it's looking pretty grim out there. And I think to myself, what's the trigger here where's the balance point going to be where the vibration of Earth is light enough that I can see it. I can personally see the rising. And right now, it's looking pretty dark. And my answer to that, or let's say what comforts me, is that we're being shown the dark because the beings that control this planet want to make sure that we bow down to the darkness and believe that the vibration is dark and that they're winning. And then when you really look deeper and you see all of the heart-centered human beings on the planet and all the greatness that is coming out of the youth. Okay, yes, we've got the element of youth and plugged in with 2 cell phones, but look at the children that are being born, the wonderful inventions that are coming out. I just feel that Earth is just fine. Despite all of the grim and gory detail, and of course we've just had tragedy after tragedy, remember that, first of all, Earth herself is a glorious being. So Earth is going to rise. And the human race, I think we are going to be surprised at what we're achieving in this time. Like I said earlier, it looks like we have to be up against the wall before we do the change that we need. And we are. So if you look at your own life, when are you your most powerful? When you're sitting with a comfortable job and a nice little house in the suburbs and a nice new car, or when you're in a revolution, you have to get a new job, things aren't working out, you're at risk of losing things. Isn't that when you get into action? I think that's where we are right now. We're faced with a very dangerous situation on this planet, and I think we're rising to the call. I think that it's going to be very surprising to see what people do with technology. It's going to come down. It doesn't look like it. It looks like it's going to take over completely, but people are starting to. I saw some footage where some people, I think it was in Oregon, took down some towers, took down cameras on towers and filmed it. And it was like, we know that you're spying on us. We're not going to put up with it anymore. I was like, wow, these are courageous people. But I think we're going to have our bags full pretty soon, and you're going to see a shift back to sanity. I'd be more than happy to see all phones go.
So when you channel these books, now are you a trance channel, meaning are you conscious of what you're channeling? Or, because I know when you wrote your first book, you fell asleep on your typewriter or computer and woke up later and all the book was already there, right? Or several chapters?
No, just a few pages.
Oh, okay.
First 3, what happened was I was in trance, which I don't really like, to be honest with you, but I was. And I must have fallen down on the keys because there was this mishmash of on the keyboard. And I went back to the beginning and I found the first 3 pages of Cosmos, this eloquent. It was my first experience with channeling. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? And after that, it's always been conscious. And I like to explain, a lot of people don't understand what channeling is like, and for me, what it's like. And that is, I don't just sit up and start proselytizing and have this wonderful rhetoric come out or sit on a stage. I've never, ever channeled in public. I don't think it's appropriate for me to do that. But usually I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I go down to the computer. 4 o'clock is the time. And I meditate. And I feel like I'm just squeezing my brain to align. And what I understand is they are pushing in their frequency to be able to reach mine, and I'm reaching up to reach theirs. And there's some point where the vibrational frequencies merge. And this information comes through to me like thought waves or bubbles. It's not just somebody saying, we speak to you today of the changing tide. It's not that drama that people understand, or it has been portrayed to be like that. It's like, and I hear or get packets, something probably like computers, packets of information that I have to assemble in my brain. And somehow the way thought is communicated utilizes my neurons and theirs and finds a meeting ground, which is very possibly the fourth dimension. But it's some days I get a sentence. Some days I'm shown an image. I was once, I remember in the Cosmos of Soul, there's a chapter called The Geometry of Consciousness, which is, for its time, 20 years ago, it was very advanced information. And when I sat down to work that morning, the room went black. Sorry, I just had it happen again just now. Wow. The distance changed. Sorry, I'm having a little moment as we speak. My perception shifted, and there was like a black screen that came on, and I was seeing all this galactic, like a TV screen. And then it was gone. And I was left to try to understand to glean from it. But the next day, that's all I got that day. And the next day, I got this information, the geometry of consciousness, which was, you have to know, I have no scientific background at all. I'm a liberal arts major in college, studied language. So I have hyperdimensional physics coming in and sacred geometry and mathematics, and I have no brain for science. So if ever there was a testimony to channeling, it would be in the fact that I have no scientific training at all. And yet a lot of scientific minded people have said, Pat, the science is right on in this information, which is going back to what we started out talking about. Let's be sure the information is grounded. And for me, it's very, very important that the aspect of this information is also grounded in science.
And what is it that caused you to be able to channel this particular collective? Were you part of that collective at some time? Or, I find oftentimes when people are channels, they often have an affinity or a connection, or they've had a future life in that collective, or in some way there's a link that causes them to be able to channel that information.
I like to avoid ever glorifying myself. I like to be in humility always. So I hate to come out and say, oh yes, I'm a Sirian. But what I will say is, when I was those child years, when I was 4 and 5, these little beings would come, and they were blue, and they would talk to me. And I used to call them the little blue people, which of course I realized later that these were Sirians that were manifesting for a kid. And they used to tell me, we know you, we see you, we know where you are, we're taking care of you, we're watching over you. So I do believe that, yes, that's my background.
So why do they appear as blue if they are fish or lion or something like that?
It's got to do with the ray. It's got nothing to do with water. It's just the you want to talk about the energies of different spectral rays, they come in on the Blu-ray, they say.
So what kind of work are you doing these days, aside from doing interviews? I know you read a lot of books, but do you do private sessions? Can you share more about that?
I have started doing private sessions again. It was a long time coming, but so many people were asking. So I'm doing clairvoyant life readings, which are pretty powerful. And I take people on sacred journeys. I moved to this island. I've become a bit of a hermit because it's kind of remote here. And that affords me more time to do these personal, first of all, my own personal journeying, and lots of contact with the technology that I just decried as needing to see it go. But yeah, I do readings over the net. I'm writing, I'm already channeling another book. I've endeavored to do some screenplays, and in fact, I've got 5 screenplays written. So I'm a pretty busy girl. And I have 2 sacred journeys coming up. One of them is to Sacred England, and the other, and I do this every year, is here in the Azores. I have people come and swim with the dolphins, and I teach a workshop with that. So I'm still out there working with the public.
Now, one of your screenplays is pretty close to being made into a film, correct?
It was. Unfortunately, we've had a setback. You know, it's like, I'll tell you, getting a movie made is beyond next to godliness. So many things have to come together to make it happen. And you have to be willing to play the game. And I'm not sure I am. So we will see. But yeah, one of them was very close to getting done, and it's not looking. But you never know. You've got to get the investors. They all have to agree on the screenplay. Then suddenly they want to change the character. Then suddenly it's not your story anymore, and it's tricky. But I'm hopeful. I've got 5 different screenplays out there, and one of them is The Emissary, which is the book that I wrote about the psychic and her contact with the whales. So, and of course, then there's the question of, the budget. And then there's the question of Hollywood and where it's orienting. I mean, if you go to a Cinemax, is there anything you'd like to see? There's no movies I'd like to see because I'm not interested in blood and gore and guts and violence and obscene sex and movies that are all made from comic books. So, you know, it's not easy to break in with a story about light.
Do you think that any of that's changing, though? Have you noticed any change in Hollywood or even in the book publishing industry that they're becoming more open or more interested in films and works that are of a higher consciousness?
Well, the book industry, absolutely. One of the biggest sectors in the publishing industry is new spirit, new thought, philosophy, etc. I mean, that is always a winner for publishers. And I have to tell you that my publisher is wonderful. I'm published by North Atlantic Books, very ethical, very supportive, and they've published all of my books because I had started with another publisher and it kind of just fell apart. So they came in and said, let us take the ball and run with it, and they've done a great job. As far as the Hollywood, I'd like to see some more. I'm not seeing, if you turn on Netflix, for example, it's darker, drugs, criminals, prison. I'm not seeing stories that really excite the spirit, but there are more and more, let's say, there's a spiritual circle, I think it's called The Circle in Hollywood, that produces spiritual films. And yeah, there's more smaller, let's say, forget the big studios, but some smaller organizations or smaller producers who are pushing through some higher quality stories. But we need more, don't you think? I'm really not thrilled with what was being offered right now for film. So let's hope that we get a new vision coming out of Hollywood.
So where can our viewers find out about you and maybe book a session if they're interested, or get involved in some of the different events that you're doing?
Well, my main website is patriciacorey.com. I also have the it's www.syrianrevelations.net. I'm all over. I'm doing a good job of getting out there on social media, which is hard, but I'm on Facebook. I've got lots of videos out there, lots of interviews. And now I'm working on a YouTube channel. So I'm being diligent and getting the word out there, because I think it's time for messages of empowerment to get out there and help people find that power and strength in the middle of a lot of chaos. And that's what I'm all about.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me today and answering all my questions. It's been a real pleasure, and hopefully we'll have you back again soon.
Thank you, Ethan. It's been great. And I'm sorry if I stumbled on some of the answers, but your questions are very probing. It's been wonderful. I really appreciate being on.
Thank you.
I'd love to be back.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Wake and Empower TV with my special guest, Patricia Corey. Join me next week as we speak with another incredible individual who's standing on the leading edge and changing the world.